us as he starts his presentation. So if we can give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everybody for attending. Really want to apologize for not being in there in person. I was looking forward to this, but once again, science and technology overcomes fear and superstition. So we've got a connection here. I've been practicing holistic management since 1987. That's like 35 years or something like that. And I'd like to share with you that process. So an overview of what I'd like to do is start out with the obligatory charts and numbers of increasing stocking rates and improving financials and all that we've all been doing for 30 years, sharing this information, yet we still only have like 3% of the people that believe those numbers and practice that. So we'll go through that, and then we'll go through how we can affect the decision makers closest to the soil surface. We have to think about where actions mean something. And the closer we get to the soil surface, the more directly we're going to affect improvements in our ecosystem, our economies, and our social situations. And we have some barriers to that. And that's the elephant in the room. And so I want to get into that, and I don't have the answers, but hopefully we can explore some questions to ask so that all of us can be more effective in getting better decisions at the soil surface. So learning the practice of holistic management, 38 years of getting from here to there. In holistic management, we talk about our holistic context, which begins with our whole under management. What is the land, the people, and the money that we have to deal with? That's where we are now, here today. And then we have our future resource base that we define as where we must be far into the future. So the first class I went to 38 years ago in a Grand Junction Holiday Inn meeting room for 7 days, for money, I really connected with me that you could double your stocking rate. And one thing that came across loud and clear to me was a gross profit analysis. How you do a gross profit analysis to calculate how we measure returns to overhead, not get bogged down in a bunch of numbers that don't mean anything. From the land side of things, for the first time ever, being a third generation, I saw the soil surface. That seems pretty profound, but it's true. It was the first time I saw the soil surface, and it's the first time I understood what overgrazing was. And on the people side of things, at that first seminar, I walked away with the idea that you could have such a thing as quality of life. And I understood that there are decision makers and how important that is, identifying who the decision makers are. So now, 38 years later, I look at these things, and having mimic nature and the predator-prey relationship and applying disturbance to the land and doing these things, I've learned that if you concentrate animals, you concentrate labor. So your labor costs go down. If you concentrate animals, they're constantly moving onto fresh ground, which translates to animal health. You just about do away with pink eye and hoof rot. and improve immune systems. And I learned that custom grazing in the context of my situation was a great way to allow me flexibility and improve income amazingly. And I learned that generating wealth begins under your feet. It's in the soil, building soil organic matter, harvesting sunlight energy, water, minerals, all these things is generating wealth. And from the land side of things, I learned that that we need to cover the soil surface. We can't tolerate bare ground. We do that by increasing plant density and having residuals to place on the soil surface. And I learned about succession. And I went from concentrating and obsessing over overgrazing single plants. And 20 or 38 years later, I realized that we're dealing with complexity. And you cannot manage complexity because complexity self-organizes. So the best we can do as managers is to influence the self-organization processes. And that's where science and organizations like SRM are invaluable in coming up with single variables that help us understand the whole of the situation that we're managing. You know, we can't manage complexity with single variables, but they provide us information and understanding and how we can influence those self-organization processes. So bottom line, we define our whole under management. This is where we are right now. And we define our future resource base, how that must be in the future. So we're constantly figuring out how to get from here to there. And on the other end of the equation, this quality of life that I struggle with so much to understand comes down to how must we behave. To get from here to there, we come up with an action. Here is how I must behave. And that is, in effect, our quality of life. How we behave every day is creating and experiencing our quality of life. It's just not a trick question. It's not that difficult. So this blue arrow here, I got this side thing that keeps getting in my way here. This blue arrow is when I went to my first holistic management seminar in 1987. And so when I moved to Lander, Wyoming, I had this allotment that was an 89% federal range permit. And right off the bat, the previous owner, they set this thing up to be a deferred rotation grazing system, yet they didn't do it. And so I agreed to do that. And so in 1980, set up some transects, and the monitoring showed there was a score of 26. Now in BLM protocol, 1 to 25 is poor, 25 to 50 is fair, 50 to 75 is good, and then excellent. And the goal of the BLM for this allotment was to be a high, fair, low, good. They wanted to be from a 45 to a 55. And just the simple deferred rotation, we improved that range score from that 26 up to here to about a 45 in 7 years when I went to my first holistic management seminar. So in 1990, when I first implemented planned grazing, holistic planned grazing, you can see that this stocking rate of this allotment that we'd improved the ecological health on we're at 100% of the stocking rate. But we had these improvements, so the BLM gave me increased AUMs. So you can see how the stocking rates improved here. So this improved 260%. Now people will tell you that you can't increase stocking rates in a BLM permit, but here's evidence that we increased it 260%. What was the key? Getting monitoring. Demonstrating that you're improving the ecological health and ecological function, and numbers, people can swallow the increased numbers better if you have that data to support that. So you back up here. So in 2000, we sold this allotment. So I strip that out of the numbers, and we go to the other part of the ranch that was a lower percent BLM land, higher percent deeded land. And so we keep that separate. So we're talking about experience. And there are so many people I've known that have been waiting to get it right for years and years. You know, I need to understand this before I'm going to implement it. But I'm here to tell you, begin now, today, with what you have. So here's what I did with no experience. 1990 was the first grazing plan I did, holistic grazing plan, and started. So I recognized more in hindsight maybe than immediately is that the problem was overrest. You had all these wolfy plants that were choking off growth points and a lot of bare ground in between. So what did we need? We needed disturbance. We needed animal impact. So then it comes down to how must we behave to get from here to there. So define the behavior that addresses the need and the problem. And the first most simple thing to do is combine herds, which is what we did. We went from like 6 herds to 2 herds and then to 1 herd. And the outcome, you know, that high disturbance opens the canopy, takes all that dead plant material, knocks it down on the soil surface. The manure and hoof prints get that ground into the ground to create germination sites and open the plants up to growing. So in just 2 years, we gained 21% in our stocking rate with no experience, just doing a basic fundamental combining herds. So year 3 and 4, what was the problem? I was understanding more about overgrazing, and we were, and a guy by the name of Dan Rogers from the University of Wyoming showed me a very simple way how to measure that. You measure where a plant was grazed, the leaves are all blunt, and then as it regrows, they telescope. So you can very quickly step off a horse and look in a pasture where you've moved the cattle out a week before. You can measure, you get an inch regrowth. You've been gone for 5 days. That's 0.2 of an inch a day growth. And so it's just being aware of what overgrazing is. And so we needed adequate recovery. So then again, it comes down to how must I behave to get from here to there? We have to identify our behavior. In this case, it was monitoring regrowth. And with Dan Rogers' help, I learned how to do that. What's the outcome? We increase plant vigor. Of course, it's just so simple. Plants with more vigor, they start growing earlier in the spring. They grow later in the fall. They grow faster when they have rest. So it's simple. And now we have 50% gain. In just 4 years, we've improved our stocking rate by 50%. So year 5 and 6, our problem, seeding establishment, where we need to longer recovery periods so that these new juvenile plants could get down some root and get some stability. So how do you do that? What is your behavior? We reduce pasture size. So we start building some cross fences and adding water development, improving water development to get some more stock density. What was the outcome? We increased plant density. So now we opened up the plants and got the dead plant material on the ground to improve the mineral cycle and germination sites. We've managed our overgrazing, so we have better plant vigor, and now we're getting return from increased plant density. Okay, so now we get out here. Now we get out here and we see our stocking rate crash. So why is that? What happened? We have in year 7 and 9, the bare ground increased. We need residuals. How do you get more residuals? Well, we need to increase recovery periods. And the outcome, here's what was going on. So we get out here 7 years into planting grazing in 97, and things are going so good that maybe we overrun our headlights a little bit. So I had an average of, if you look on the right side there, our recovery periods were about a year, 350 days or so. And then I really got smart. So we're gonna graze about a third of the pasture twice, third of the pastures. So we dropped our recovery periods down to 180 days. And that's when this bare ground started increasing. I saw it, when I would move out of a pasture, I would do a step transect right behind the animals. And in a step transect, you could see that bare ground was increasing. And I thought I was doing everything right. But after the second year of that, I immediately started increasing recovery periods again. And it took 3 years to get back to that 350 days. But what really doubled us down is the fact that we got into this drought, a 250-year drought. In 2003, we had 2.5 inches in the winter. In 2006 was the first time ever in history that we had no measurable precip in April and May. So we're increasing. We got our recovery periods out here to 530 days so that we could accumulate some plant material or residuals to cover the soil surface. So giving that an overview, was holistic management worth it? And this gives us, a perspective. So when we started, call that 100%, and all of the allotments around us were at 100%, but we were doing holistic plan grazing, working with the BLM and monitoring, and we went up to 6,700 AUMs. And then we got into that 97, 98 here where the bare ground was increasing, and with the drought, our production started falling down. But note that our 2006 yield, this is 6 years of drought, the worst drought in recorded history. Our stocking rate was 85% of our 10-year average. We were at 90% of the baseline. We were 39% less than the peak, the 96 peak. So it was all pretty good. Then we got in this drought, and the BLM was cutting everybody 50%, and some of our neighbors were cut 75%. And you can see that we bottomed out here at about 60% of our baseline, maybe 65, about 65% of our baseline. So we're still way better off than we would have been. But what we learned is that recovery periods in a low production, brittle environment, part of that definition means having enough residuals to get on the soil surface and cover the soil surface. Where high production brittle environments like Zimbabwe, they're constantly trying to remove all that plant litter. They get too much, it gets too deep. So two different kinds of environments require a different approach to plant recovery. Okay, so here's what it looked like in 2006, after 16 years of holistic plant grazing and 6 years of the worst ever drought. This is land EKG monitoring that we're using at that time. And there were only 3 indicators less than 70. And we had litter contact was a 90, litter abundance was 91. Bare ground was a score of 73. That's not 73% bare ground. Is it a score of 73? So those 3 indicators that were less than 70 were litter distribution, total canopy, and production potential, which all would be obvious in a drought. But with the longer recovery periods, we were able to keep plant residuals to cover the soil surface. And with 550 days recovery period, it was almost at grazing land every other year, which worked well in hindsight. And this quote was from Kurt Gadzia. Kurt Gadzia says, when you're in a drought, you have to remember that it doesn't rain grass. You have to remember that you're preparing the soil surface for the rain. And if you don't do that, when the rains come, they wash everything away and dry up. But if you have that soil surface prepared for the raindrop, you're going to come out of there pretty good shape. So let's think about the factors. And holistic management, we have an idea called marginal reaction. We want to make our first efforts where you get the best return. And on this ranch in Twin Creek, south of Lander, Wyoming there, we had 3% of the surface area that contributed 35% of the total production on that ranch. And it's these little ribbon riparian areas on the uplands. You look at those, and they're not very wide. But when you have a downcut river, your riparian area may only be 10 feet or whatever. If you reconnect the river to the floodplain, you have lateral bank storage that goes out, and you have that entire floodplain with water. And so you increase your stocking rate on that ground that may only be in some of these steep areas that may only be 100 yards wide, maybe a quarter mile at best. But you have that all wetted. So your stocking rate goes from like 30 animal days per acre to maybe 250 animal days per acre on 3% of the land. So when we were in this drought, our uplands production declined like 60, 70%. But the riparian areas that were reconnected to the floodplain with like no rain in 86 and the worst drought in history, their production remained static. It was the same. Through that whole drought, those riparian areas produced the same. So your best strategy for drought management is to have healthy riparian areas that are reconnected to the floodplain, because if you do that, there is no drought. A little closer up look at what's happening. This is a pasture that I didn't have in the holistic grazing plan because it was too large. So for 5 years, then I finally learned how to use some temporary electric fence, and we started doing planned grazing there. So you can see in just 4 years, we've got this riparian area healing up. You can see the brush, how it's becoming healthier. And just once again, think about what we did here in that first 5, 6, 7 years of implementing holistic management. We interrupted over rest. We improved our plant vigor. We increased our plant density, and we increased diversity and complexity. And what was our behavior to get that done? We mobilized oxidizing plant material. We minimized overgrazing, and we thought of residuals as part of recovery. So we had something to cover that soil surface. And we influenced complexity, which really adds a bunch more. So these are not magic. It's totally logical progression. Yet we explain it over and over and over again for the last 30 years. And some people just don't think it applies to them. So what is the problem? So here is right downstream from that last slide. This slide here just come downstream just a couple 100 yards. And here's a good picture of how the riparian area and the stream channel narrows. You can see the sediment in that top thing going into that bank there, narrows up the channel. As you narrow up the channel, higher flows come out on the floodplain, and you have green line. That green line catches sediment and narrows up the channel more. Then you start raising bed elevation, and you get to where the river in low flow is connected to the floodplain. That picture on the right is a real good example of how this happens. The process happens. You can see right where the dog is, there's algae. And that algae catches sediment. Right above the dog, you can see where that sediment is caught in this algae. Now, if cattle are season-long grazing or in there for too long of a time, like 30 days or more, they come in there getting a drink and they loosen all that up and tear it up, and then that sediment goes downstream. But if in their short time period, this all establishes. So then you move up the bank a little bit and you see the rushes come in, the first plants starting to stabilize the bank. And you go up a little further and you have sedges. The sedges really tie the bank up until you get back to the top of the stream bank. So just understanding these processes, and as a novice grazer out there or ecological manager out there, I relied a lot on the Wyoming Game and Fish, the extension agent, the BLM people, the ranchers. In my book, I talk about in Green Grass in the Spring, I talk about all these people that helped me understand these processes so that I could improve things there at the soil surface. So what do we get? With all these things that we've done, we double our stocking rate. So you basically get a free ranch without any overhead. Get a free ranch without any more overhead. And the only thing we have to do is different management. So this picture right here is where Twin Creek ran off from our ranch there in Lander. And the photographer's standing on a bridge. The picture on the left is upstream on our place. And then he turned around on the bridge and took a picture of downstream where it ran off from our place. The only difference is different management. Same soil, same land, same river, same moment. Just looking at things a little differently and influencing the self-organization processes towards more diversity and complexity. So then we made a decision to move to Oregon, and we used the holistic decision-making model to define how that would happen. So we went through and we defined these core values that were important to us. We wanted wildness. We wanted scale of labor. We wanted ease of management. We wanted diverse markets, primarily access to grass-finished beef markets. We needed potential gain in the ecological function of the ranch and finances. We needed access to better services. We wanted a progressive, conservative balance in our social situation. We wanted transhumance, live water. We have all these values. So then we scored, we scored these values with these different ranches that we looked at. So we used Twin Creek there on the very first one on the x-axis there as the baseline. So using all of these values that were important to Andrea's and my life, Twin Creek scored about a 2.5. And then all these other ranches that we looked at over the years, and we owned and sold some, they had a score. So we were evaluating beyond it. It took us about 5 years or so, thinking through this process and getting this done. And in Green Grass in the Spring, the epilogue talks about that process and our move to Oregon. So one of the first ranch we bought was one that was in CRP. And I've just always been an advocate against CRP. I worked with a guy from the University of Washington who did his master's on CRP. He said the only time wildlife used it was when they were crossing it to get to another place. And so we took it out of CRP with the goal of demonstrating that it would be more profitable if we didn't have it in CRP. And we documented that. So you remember we left Twin Creek after 6 years of the worst drought in recorded history, and we only had 3 indicators of land EKG less than 70. So here in this CRP property, after 26 years of rest, we have 8 indicators that are less than 70. Here's a good picture of a transect we did. There's the CRP ground on the left after just 3 years of grazing on the right, same spot. That hairy vetch came in right off the bat and just added a lot of diversity and production to the place. So on that CRP place, in just 3 years, we increased our stocking rate 50%. And then the place where we live, we bought was for salmon habitat. And when we were on our place in Wyoming, we had sage grouse. And we did a lot of work with the University of Wyoming and sage grouse habitat and tracking and monitoring. It was interesting. It was fun. It was profitable. So when we made our move, one of the things on our list was an endangered species. And where we came to, that ended up being salmon. So we work to put water in stream to support salmon habitat. And as you can see here, we increased our stocking rate by 80% in just a few years by using less water, less irrigation. And an important part in understanding all this is succession on the land. Now we see what's happening above the ground, but we need to understand that that cannot happen without support below the ground. You know, we have bare ground, and then we have an annual weed, then we have annual grass, then we get a perennial weed. So then we panic and we spray a herbicide, so then you go back to bare ground, rather than moving through the succession process to more diversity and complexity. And the same thing is happening below the ground. So Where does this succession and biodiversity and regeneration begin? You know, the water cycle, we have to capture the raindrop. The mineral cycle, we need biological decomposition, not chemical decomposition. We must have biological decomposition. Energy flow, we need to capture sunlight. Community dynamics, we need to supply multiple pathways for water, minerals, and sunlight to move. So it comes down to how we must behave. To cover the soil surface, we need to place those residuals on the ground. We've discussed already. To get biological decomposition, we'll get soil organic matter. And to do that, we need to implement recovery periods. To capture the sunlight, we need leaf area. We need to open up plant canopies and get more of those high-producing plants that are susceptible to overrest. And finally, we need to add species. One of the things I've learned is that I think most all of us agree that resiliency and relies on diversity and complexity. Regeneration requires on diversity and complexity. So by definition, if we ever have a problem, we need to ask, what do I add to the equation and not what do I remove? If you're looking at your community dynamics through a spray nozzle, you're just going in the wrong direction. We need to think about what to add. So where do we see all these things? All these things that can improve the ecosystem process are at or near the soil surface. So we need to support the decision makers closest to the soil surface. Here's a lot of different contexts, different types of soil surface. And all these people are out there on the ground making decisions about how to harvest and how to grow forage. And we just need to realize that the landscapes across our entire world are fully staffed. People are there. They're on the ground. They're making decisions. And if you're an academic or an agency person or an environmentalist, you're not going to make any difference in the health of the ecosystem and the health of the world unless you can influence the decisions that these decision makers make. So how do we do that? How do we get past this bottleneck that we've had of people not adopting better management practices? And here's what I think. Now, why do people change? They change based on internal forces. They change based on getting a sense of independence, of competence, and connection to others. They don't change based on facts or thinking. And so much of our stuff that we talk about is based on that. And so why is that? We have these barriers. And I give examples of this in green grass in the spring about, my friend Jared Sorensen with down in Clover Valley, Nevada, done a lot of work with addiction and allergies. Addiction is something that we embrace and we want to hang on to. We need to have it. And the cowboy thing, we want to be tough. We want to show that we can overcome all of the bad things, the tough situations. And so we resist success. We avoid success like the plague because then we can't be a hero. We have to show that we're tough and we can fix it. And you can talk to Jared Sorensen about that more and maybe figure out how those things apply. So for me, how how do we get people to focus on that independence, competence, and connection to others, rather than being self-absorbed in the addiction and allergy? And I think that is right here. Think of the decision makers at the soil surface on this X-axis. You have the entitled at one end. You have the insecure at the other end. And as they gain knowledge, as people gain knowledge, you gain confidence and you move towards the center here. You know, our industry, the cowboy industry, is like me, for example, and I tried to demonstrate in green grass in the spring, is that I was a third generation white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, firstborn male rancher in Wyoming. I was the most entitled son of a gun that in the past 150 years, probably. And as a result, I couldn't hear or see things beyond what my perception was. So how do we affect that? How do we get these people to gain confidence? And I think it's curiosity. And if we go through green grass in the spring, I have example after example of these people that helped me. They'd give me a little something that I was curious about. But before you can really get to that degree of confidence, we need to develop character. So what is character? And there might be a lot of things, you know, humble, empowering, compassion, all these things. But I think the basic core is empathy, is having empathy. Empathy for the land, empathy for the soil, empathy for your staff, empathy for your customers, empathy for the animals. It just brings a different focus, and that allows you some confidence to think about being curious. So like you guys have all this knowledge and science that you do, and single variables, you can provide information, you can provide facts, you can provide science. Like Dan Rogers showed me how to measure a plant regrowth. Like the Game and Fish showed me different species of willows and how the habitat of those different willows. The guy in the sale barn taught me about cattle markets. There's all these different examples about people feeding my curiosity, but it has to be done in a way so that it promotes action. So that's the trial and error, your experience and perspective. You're gaining, you're doing these things, and you continue to build this base, this degree of confidence through curiosity. So that's what I suggest, that those of us that are not making decisions right at the soil surface, is ways that we can influence better decisions at the soil surface, is tapping into those people that are living and operating on the land, feed them information that will make them curious, feed their curiosity, and that will grow a degree of confidence and will turn this thing around. So conventional decision-making and the holistic management decision-making model starts right here: actions and decision-making, objectives, goals, tactics, strategies, policies, and this. But it's all telling people to do something, like best management practices. You have to do this, and facts, and people don't change based on facts or data, these things. We need to get back to that sense of accomplishment. So holistic management, we step back and we start thinking about our whole under management, what we have to work with, and how we must be in the future, and how we behave to get from here to there. And it usually begins in the ecosystem processes. I don't think I've ever been on a ranch where we didn't get the decision makers in a circle and look at the ground. And I can say that if you see what you see here, you like, then we're okay. If you don't like what you see here, we need to change what we've been doing. And everybody can agree on that. Everybody pretty much unites around the ecosystem process, and then we can go from there to the social and financial type situations. And it comes to here. In holistic management, we don't have someone standing at the lectern in front of the people. You're just all standing in a circle. We're all part of it. We all see things differently based on our life experience and our perspective and our knowledge base and our skills. And everybody has a little something different, but it's a greater whole when you stand in this circle and look at it. So I thank you all for your time. Here's our contact info. I work with the UVI Hub, a Savory Institute Hub, UVI, and you can see the website there. And here's my website, holisticmanagement.guide, and my email. And anyone, please feel free to contact us and go from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tony. We have, I would say, when we're getting that set up, yeah, if we can give them a round of applause. We're getting our next presenter set up. I'll hand the microphone off to Mikey, and we can at least give one question right now, and then we'll have a further question and answer period around. So Mikey, just if anybody has a question, go walk the microphone up there. So if anybody has a question.
Hello, Tony. My name is Justin. I had a question. Earlier on, you showed some slides in that 10-year period on your increase and your decrease during those drought years. And I was wondering, I know hindsight is 2020, so I was wondering if there was anything you would think of or you recommend to offset that delta and narrow that gap, just as a producer.
Yeah, just the feedback loop. I'll take it seriously about monitoring. I saw that bare ground increasing when I reduced those recovery periods, and I responded in 2 years, but with the drought on top of me, I was kind of behind the curve. But as I also showed, I was still better off than I would have been if I hadn't been practicing holistic grazing plan for those 10 years before. So, yeah, I don't have an answer because it just depends on the context of the situation. We all have a different environment. We have different livestock needs, and it's just using the holistic decision-making process to get through it. And what I hope I demonstrated in that show is that I was better off with that. However imperfect I did it, I was still better off with it than without it. I was better off at starting with zero experience, and I gained 21% production in just 2 years. I gained 50% in 4 years without the experience. So one of my favorite sayings is that that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So just do it. Go out, identify what you have to work with, what you must have in the future, and how do I get from here to there? That's how I must behave. Does that add anything?
I think that answered the question. Thanks, Tony. We're gonna, Tony will still be here probably at the end of the session to answer more questions, but we're gonna move forward to our next presenter.